Telecom regulator talks tough just a day after it slashed interconnect charges. TRAI chairman R.S. Sharma tells ET now that profits and losses of telcos are not his concern, even as he denies charges of policy inconsistency. Also asserts IUC calculations are clearly laid out in the TRAI memo.
Help for industry is on its way, says Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, confirming that financial relief could be in the offing for ailing sectors. A day after holding talks with key cabinet colleagues, the Finance Minister says government will do all it takes to pump prime the economy.
The Tata-Tyson deal is finally done. The two companies form a 50-50 JV to create a 15 billion euro metal giant. Tata Sons chairman N. Chandrasekaran says the deal will help Tata Steel India to chase organic and inorganic growth opportunities.
Breather for the E. Palaniswamy government in Tamil Nadu. The Madras High Court bars floor test in the assembly until further orders, even as it refuses to stay the Speaker's disqualification of 18 rebel MLAs belonging to the Dinakaran camp. The next hearing in the case will be held on the 4th of October.
Heavy rains lash Mumbai for a second day in a row. Flight schedules go haywire, even as suburban train services and road traffic remains chaotic. Massive waterlogging is reported all across the city. Schools remain shut while private and government offices see very thin attendance.
Another feather in Dhoni's cap. Indian Cricket Board recommends the former Indian skipper for the country's third highest civilian honour, the Padma Bhushan. Dhoni will be the 11th cricketer to win this coveted award if the government accepts BCCI's recommendation.
And no end to Mexico's miseries. More than 250 people are killed as a massive earthquake rocks the capital city. The tragedy comes just a week after a massive earthquake struck off the southern coast of the country, killing at least 90 people. President Pena Nieto says the country is facing a new national emergency. Good evening. The telecom regulator has virtually sounded the death knell of the Indian telecom industry. Slashing of interconnect charges by as much as 60% at a time when telcos are battling for survival will severely impact future investments and growth of the sector. Many see the move as one that clearly favors Mukesh Ambani's Reliance Jio, even as the likes of Vodafone and Airtel are now gearing up for a court battle.
This isn't just about the viability of one industry that contributes 6.5% of the GDP, that employs 4 million people, that contributes 70,000 crores annually to the exchequer. This is about policy inconsistency. This is, I dare say, about crony capitalism. Can the government afford to turn a blind eye? We discuss saving telecom on the India Development Debate this evening. I'm Sandeep Gurumurthy in Mumbai. Joining me in Delhi is my colleague Supriya Srinath on the India Development Debate. Okay, let's take it straight to our panel this evening. Joining us on the show tonight, Sanjeev Aga, telecom expert, Rajan Matthews, Director General at COAI, Sanjay Kapoor, industry expert, RSP Sinha, former CMD of MTNL, RK Upadhyay, former chairman of BSNL, and a very special guest, Rahul Khullar, former chairman of TRAI. Mr. Khullar and all my panelists, thank you so much for joining us on the show this evening. I'm going to start off with you, Mr. Khullar, because, you know, we don't want to beat around the bush. We're debating this a day after this, what many call shocking piece of regulation from the telecom regulator. Simple question, is the telecom sector in India being regulated based on the need and ambition of one new operator? Vodafone's global CEO Vittorio Colau made this startling allegation in a letter to the telecom minister a fortnight ago, and if you look at the actions that have happened since then, it seems almost true. Do you believe that the sector is being regulated based on the ambition and need of one operator?
Let me only say this. I think the actions of the regulator over the last 1 year have led to this charge of partisanship. And I think the nail in the coffin is the order issued yesterday, which in my view is a very, very poor decision indeed. The charges against the regulator started more than a year ago when new tariff plans were introduced by an entrant, and these tariff plans had to have the clearance of the TRAI. But the TRAI basically dawdled over it, first in September to December, then again in January to March, till such time as the TDSAT had to tell them take a view in the matter. and they still didn't. The point was, by not taking a decision in the matter, you let the entrant operator do exactly what he wanted for the next 9 months. Now, in the wake of all that happening, just as the dust had about to begun to settle, all right, let's have fair and free competition, you come out with this order. Very honestly, I've read that explanatory memorandum at length, and at times when I was reading it, it seemed to me as if the decisions had been taken already and the rationale was then being written up rather than the reverse. And I think that is what is going to cause a lot of harm both to the industry, but also to the credibility of regulation, the regulator itself, and to the government, because how can a government stand by and watch this happen to a sector as large as this? So let me stop there at this point of time.
Exactly. The question really is, can the government be a mute spectator? Because this isn't just another sector. It contributes 6.5% to your GDP. Mr. Sanjeev Aga, let me throw this to you. And like Dr. Kullar said there, it almost seems when you read through those documents that a decision has been made and then a lot of explanation is happening. The rationale to arrive at the decision has perhaps been written after the decision has been made. Will you agree with Dr. Kullar, and will you also agree with Vittorio Colau when he says that actions or regulations in telecom, at least from the regulatory body, are basically aimed at giving advantage to the new entrant, which in this case is Reliance Jio?
Supriya, yes, Dr. Kullar has put it in very elegant language. I don't have his command on words or even his knowledge of regulation. But I could see this coming for a mile, and sometimes I even wonder who has scripted this. And I completely agree. I think, you know, this is beyond 1 or 2 or 3 companies. Let us say, for the sake of argument, that some big telecom companies are dispensable. But I look at it as a citizen. I look at it also as a grandparent. And our big problem in India has been the absence of ability to build credible institutions, without which you can never build infrastructure. And telecom was the one sector where you had half decent regulation, and I see this as a striking example of institutional collapse. And the impact of this is going to be not just in telecom; it is going to be across the sectors.
Okay, strong words there coming from both Dr. Rahul Kullar and Sanjeev Aga, but let me throw to RSP Sinha, because RSP Sinha here on the panel is defending the IUC rate cut. So, Mr. Sinha, a simple question to you: do you believe this rate cut, this IUC cut of 58%, would not have happened if, or would have happened if there wasn't a new operator by the name Reliance Jio that had entered the market? You know, would this have happened if there wasn't a Reliance Jio? Was there a compelling need for this to happen? Because who is the beneficiary here? You know, people are making this point on how customers will benefit, and we are going to debate that. Brokerages claim there's only one beneficiary, and that's Reliance Jio, that's going to potentially gain about 5,000 crores as a result of this order. Mr. Sinha.
Yeah, I would like to take you back to the history, to 2003, and I'm happy that TRAI is being accused right from 2003. It is not that today. At that time, we were accusing that you are trying to favor the new operators. MTNL, BSNL were the incumbents. And when IUC was reduced from 50 paisa to 30 and then further downwards, it was hurting both the companies. And our cost of operation was so high because of hierarchical nature and huge employee cost that we were not able to meet. And then it was said that we cannot pay you for your inefficiency. Today, if it has been reduced, the same accusation is being made by the old operators who were new at that point of time. So therefore, I feel today TRAI has taken away the IUC on fixed line charges. No termination charge is being paid for incoming call on fixed line or from fixed line to fixed line. Why? Because MTNL, BSNL owns the largest fixed line. So therefore, it is, I don't agree with the accusation that what TRAI does, it does to favor the new operators. If it is true, then at that point of time also, it was true that TRAI was favoring the new operators.
But is that reason enough to do or undo a wrong? Let me throw this to Rajan Matthews, who represents the incumbent operators here, also actually represents Felcher. Rajan, in many ways, what Mr. Sinha is saying, this happened to MTNL so many years back when all of you were new operators. Why create such a hue and cry now? In some sense, he's calling upon divine providence. But how would you counter that argument today? No, I'm just taking it to Rajan Matthews.
Supriya, that's like comparing. Yeah, Supriya, again, thank you. That's like comparing apples and oranges in this particular situation where you have BSNL, MTNL, which were the incumbent dominant monopoly providers subsidized for ages, and then talking about how they react to new incumbent operators entering. I think the scenario that we face today is hardly of the same caliber. You have a well-heeled, efficient, new operator coming in, offering a completely digital, if you will, or LTE based network, competing against operators that have, because of government mandates, having to offer 2G type services for the last 15 to 20 years. You cannot then say that we will ignore government mandated responsibilities to incumbents under license and then say we'll treat them in the same fashion. So I think the ground level realities are very different. And I think as a result, to begin to start saying that we will use pure lyric to be able to determine these types of costs, I think really goes to the issue that was highlighted by Dr. Kuller. A decision appears to be searching for the appropriate methodology to substantiate the particular decision. Everybody knows that incremental pure lyric will give you the lowest termination charge. That's not rocket science. So I think Dr. Kuller articulated it quite well.
Okay, let's talk about the other, the elephant in the room, because I know this bogey is going to be used a lot, which is that this is a move that's going to bring down tariffs and customers are going to benefit. So, everyone should welcome the move. Now, I would argue actually that, considering where tariffs are in this country, is there really scope for tariffs to come down? But, let's leave that anti-consumer point aside. Dr. Kuller, a more specific question to you is are tariffs really going to come down? Is there scope for that to happen? Or is it just the off-net tariffs that could potentially come down for subscribers of a particular operator? I mean, do you really see this regulation bringing down telecom tariffs by 57% as is being claimed by some people?
No. Simple answer. No. There's no way that's going to happen. And TRAI knows it, the government knows it, and the industry knows it. The truth of the matter is, you may see some dip in tariffs and then a subsequent rise again, but nothing substantial, first. Number two, I think what we all need to consider is how this decision is completely unrelated to Indian realities. Let me make 3 points and then you will see what I am getting at. Throughout the explanatory memorandum, there is not even one word, not one word about the state of the industry's finances, not one. Now, this is astonishing, particularly since government has been working on how to save the telecom sector. And the mandate of TRAI is not only to protect the interests of consumers, it is also to oversee the orderly development of the industry. So if you are going to take a decision which disrupts the industry, even if it is at the benefit of the consumers, sorry, you've not done your job, because you have to balance those interests. Second, as Rajan pointed out, everybody knows that the methodology that they're using gives the lowest cost. The question to ask is this: 2 years ago, they used a particular methodology. What has happened in the space of 2 years that they have suddenly gone turtle and gone to the other end? Why this sudden need? Why? Please explain. Third, coverage in India, rural coverage is 40%. When you aggregate it and not count in SIMs, but you count in terms of persons, it's going to be much less. Who is going to roll out the investment in networks to these people if there is no resources available with the private sector? Who's going to do it? Well, the government is certainly not doing it, because the NFON and all the sort of song and dance that was done by the Telecom department 2 years ago, nothing is there to show for it. So these are real Indian related concerns. Last one point. The very same Telecom paper which they have issued shows that the European tariff is Euro 1.27, which comes to roughly 90 rupees. So please compare 90 rupees as a termination charge with 14 paisa and draw your own conclusions. Second, the cost of spectrum in India, it's outrageously high. You know it, I know it, and it's way higher than anywhere in the world. Now, if you do not use add the spectrum cost, you're living in a fictional world. But that's exactly what they have done. They have excluded spectrum costs, they have excluded common costs, and used a textbook theory formula from Europe to arrive at a cost. Now, if that is the methodology they are using, somebody needs to ask, why this sudden change? Please explain to us, and please also explain to us why the Indian realities that I have enumerated have simply not been taken into account. Thank you.
We are actually making regulation for Europe if you read those through papers, it seems. But Sanjay Kapoor, I'm going to throw this to you. The point that Dr. Khullar made, and I think the biggest takeaway from this point is, how does the regulator turn around and say, I don't care about the gains and the losses of the telecom operators, that's really not my concern. If it is not the concern of the regulatory authority, whose concern it is? I mean, somebody has to go out there and think about the health of this sector. Are we going to preside over the death of telecom, as Arun Jaitley told us 3 months back? And that's exactly the attitude that TRAI is putting on display here. Sanjay Kapoor.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you're bringing this point up, and I've been saying it for a while that I think we are making too much out of the IUC. No operator, and this industry is not going to go belly up because the IUC rates are changing in isolation. IUC at the end of the day is a settlement between two operators for traffic that they terminate on each other's network. I think the problem gets accentuated because of the overall health of the industry. The fact of the matter, and what Mr. Khullar said a little while ago, that India is a very atypical country where spectrum is priced ridiculously high compared to any other part of the world, and that spectrum is being put to use to serve 2G, 3G, 4G. Then we have the price realization in the market because of competition, because of new entrant, or because of everybody believing that this is how a country with 1.3 billion potential customers needs to be served, that we have the least possible realization on prices. And the net result of that is we end up giving whole lot of data free, we end up giving whole lot of voice free. There's no other country in the world, even developed countries with such solid infrastructure, who go and offer unlimited data on wireless networks. But it happens in India, even without a robust backhaul that can support that promise and customer experience in the long run. The other factor, which is beyond our control, is the longevity of technology is really coming down. What was good for 10 years is now good for 4 or 5 years. Okay. Given all this, the net result is what we see every morning. The revenues of operators are falling down. The profitability has gone into the red. It's almost evaporated. We've got net debt to EBITDA ratios which are skyrocketing, and banks are fretting because at what stage these will become non-performing asset is anybody's guess. And in the midst of this, we have an IUC. So therefore, IUC is pinching. IUC in isolation can't bring down the industry. It's the overall health that we need to watch out.
Point noted. You're saying you have to see it in the context, and you forgot what is also coming down is the revenue that the government makes from this sector. We must not lose sight of the fact that the revenue that the government was making from the telecom sector has also taken a sharp turn over the last 2 quarters. But, I'm going to take it to Mr. Upadhyay, who also joins in, and he's got a different point of view, and I want to hear him on that as well. But let's talk about the substantive parts, reasons why the telecom regulators come up with this recommendation. I have read every page of the document put out by the telecom regulator. And one of the reasons given, Mr. Upadhyay, is that for the rationale for this is that it says that the current mechanism of pricing as far as IUC is concerned is based on what the regulator called yesteryear's technology. So the regulator is referring to 2G and 3G as yesteryear's technology, and that there will be no incentive, the regulator says, for operators to migrate to a new efficient technology like VoLTE. And so the regulator believes that by bringing down the IUC rates, operators will be forced to migrate to a more efficient technology. Does this argument really cut eyes? Is it the market that should determine what technologies operators offer, or should be the regulator and its vision of technology?
See, we are talking of IUC because of the overall poor health of telecom sector, financial health at the moment. Otherwise, IUC is just a very small part. Coming back to the arguments which you just read, which TRAI has given while determining this IUC of 6 paisa, I'm inclined to agree with them that the termination cost cannot be totally, unrelated to the technology. So it has definitely got linkage to the technology being used. Now, the incumbent operators are using the circuit switch technology, and they have now announced that they will roadmap to migrate to IP networks. Well, it's anybody's point that whether this step could have been taken little earlier. But so far as consumers are concerned, since there is a technology available where the termination costs are almost irrelevant, they are near zero, why should customer not be getting benefit of that? When I say customer getting benefit, I don't really mean that tariffs will come down drastically. Tariffs are already quite low in our country. But what it means really is this, that the lower IUC will encourage incumbents, rather it will facilitate expeditious migration to IP networks. Therefore, the masses which are deprived of mobile internet currently will also get mobile internet. So the question is that, the broadband, this new technology is capable of offering or facilitating broadband services to the unserved areas as well. Therefore, encouragement to the new migration to the new technology is really, in my opinion, very important.
I don't know if that encouragement should come at this big cost, and should that be the regulator deciding what that encouragement should be, or should that the market that should determine? But that's a point you've made. I'm going to get Sanjeev Agar to not just react to that, but the larger point that Mr. Upadhyay is making, that termination charges have dropped for 26 EU countries. That's exactly what that paper is also quoting by the TRAI. Why should it not be for India? Termination charge as a percentage of tariffs. But tariffs are rock bottom in this country. Can that be a fair comparison at all? Can India be compared to EU markets? A point that Dr. Khullar also made a little while back. Termination charge as a percentage of tariffs, that's a lopsided argument, I would believe, as far as India versus 26 European Union countries are concerned.
Supriya, I want to make 4 points. I'm reacting to your question and a few other comments. This business of MTC, mobile termination charge, as a percentage of tariff is a metric which I'm hearing for the first time, and in my humble opinion, it has no relevance at all. It is a completely spurious metric. And if your tariff is 0, then what is your percentage? It is infinite. So I don't know where that comes in from. The second point I want to make is your question of whether the market should determine or the regulator should determine technology. It is actually the consumer's handset. If your handset is 2G or 3G or 4G, and 4G can be with VoLTE or it can be without VoLTE, that alone determines what is the cost of termination. So to just say that this is an old operator with old technology is a red herring. It is a smoke screen. Everyone knows that is not the case, but unfortunately this is what the entire country is talking about. The third point I want to make, and I want to have a small point of difference with my ex-colleague in the sector, Sanjay Kapoor, and also with Mr. Sinha, IUC is not a small part. IUC, and I would here like to bring in Dr. Khullar, who has been a regulator. There is something scripted in the previous literature some years ago, which says that there is reference to symmetry of outgoing and incoming calls.
Right.
and when that symmetry is disturbed from what is normally almost 1:1, the words used, and I am saying this from memory, it is the tariff plan, the burden of a tariff plan of say competitor A being passed on to competitor B, and that is impermissible. So you can have any IUC, but if you have 10:1 asymmetry, which is unnatural and which is by design gaming the system, it is a clear cut case of huge regulatory arbitrage. And the final point I want to make is that who knows, I mean, not the best of technologists in the world knows what technology is going to have see the light of day 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. No astrologer knows it. We have 2G, 3G, 4G, 4G with VoLTE, 5G, and God knows what gives any particular regulator this foresight to say that 3 years from now, this is what I want. In my opinion, that is impermissible. This is a technology neutral regime. You cannot take the country down a cul-de-sac, and this amounts to a regulator driven cross subsidy from one set of operators to another operator.
Okay, Sanjeev Vaga is calling it a regulator-driven cross-subsidy from one set of operators to another set of operators, and says that how can the regulator have the foresight to take a call on what technology will be relevant 3 years from now? RSP Sinha, you want to counter those points made there, valid points made there by Sanjeev Vaga. RSP Sinha.
I would like to again submit the same thing. In 2003, the IUC charges were reduced from 50 paisa to 30 paisa. And from 30 paisa, it has come down to the level of 14 paisa. And as far as I remember, in 2010, almost there was a consensus when these new operators about whom we are talking were not there, that IUC is going to be brought down to the 0 level. And again, every time whenever our IUC was reduced, we were protesting. This cannot be taken away. Today, I agree with Sanjay Kapoor that whatever he was telling, that because of the pain, because of the spectrum charges, which has become a big burden for the operators, you cannot justify that IUC should remain. When the operators are transferring their calls within intranet, their rates are quite low. Then they are not talking, okay, the cost is involved. But the moment it becomes an internet termination of call, then you say it should be so much of price should be involved. Now, if you want to justify that the percentage drop which had taken place, if you calculate from 50 paisa to this level, 14 paisa, again it was a big drop. And then in 2010, when the papers were prepared that the IUC charges is going to be brought down to 0, then what was the justification at that point of time? So, and plus, you cannot stop the march of technology. Mr. Aga was telling you, okay, the termination of call will depend upon the handset and other, but your in IP network, the voice cannot give you any revenue. It will be minimal. It has to be data driven. Then only the telecom operator will survive. And in IP termination, how can you charge about the voice? Because voice is not in the original form. It has to be in data form.
Okay,
so
fair
therefore,
enough.
that has to be.
Mr. Sinha, I'm going to interrupt you. Let me get a word from Dr. Kullar, and I'm going to again quote from the TRAI order. And one point that Mr. Sinha made, Dr. Kullar, I want you to comment on that. He says, which the order says as well, that there is very low tariff for on-net calls, but higher tariff for off-net calls. For the benefit of a viewer, an on-net call is calls made from say an Airtel subscriber to an Airtel subscriber, whereas an off-net call is one from an Airtel subscriber to a Vodafone or a Jio subscriber, right? So the regulator says intriguing because there should also be a cost for on-net calls as work done for terminating call is the same. It also says the additionality of costs for receiving calls in the strictest sense is close to 0. Dr. Kullar, you've been a regulator yourself. How do you sort of respond to this comment made by the TRAI and also by Mr. Sinha on this arbitrage between calls made within the same network and between calls made from one network to another?
There is a point to that, and I have considered this not now. We took this into consideration when the 2015 order was made, and the same situation was done when the 2009 order was made. As I said earlier, I think what is happening here is a decision has been made and then we're coming up for reasons to justify it. Let me make 2 points or a couple of points which I think should clear the picture. Number one, we are nowhere near all IP networks, nowhere near. And I think this is, typically a red herring, that IP networks are fully IP networks are around the corner and therefore we should do this. It's plain wrong. We are nowhere there. As I mentioned earlier, forget anything else. Do we have IP even to our rural areas? What has happened to the BharatNet project? So please be very careful while making these assumptions about what technology is currently available. The second point I think you need to consider is this. Even if TRAI thinks that it wishes to encourage a particular technology, which I don't think is a good, it has to ask itself the following question. Where are the resources going to come from? What is the state of the finances of the industry? And this is a question they have not even bothered to address. So it worries me that decisions like this are being taken. Last point. Let me ask you the following question. When we pass a law to levy a tax, do we simultaneously say that, well, the tax this year is going to be 9%, but in 2 years it's going to be 7%? We don't. Then what was the unseemly hurry to say that in 2020 I will have MTC equal to 0 or BAK? Meaning, why could you not take that decision in 2019? What was the unseemly hurry to take that decision today? And that is what is going to give the impression that this has been done for a particular operator so that a decision which that operator wants is in the bag. That is most dangerous for any regulatory body. Thank you.
That's a very valid point, and I think that leaves a lot of us thinking and pondering over why was there such a hurry to arrive at a decision in 2020? Why could we not wait and see this pan out over the next 3 years? Valid argument indeed. But Rajan Mathew, let me throw this to you. Vittorio Colau, I think in that letter that he wrote to the Telecom Minister, very categorically warned of large-scale shutdown of cellular sites in rural India. Does this move also damage the case for more active rural sites? Does this also damage the case for a digital India to begin with? Because these rural sites, are low payoff, and then you have an IUC which is going to hit your finances. So the first thing you're going to do is curtail your costs. Is that a valid concern, or do you believe that some of that fear is exaggerated? And you've got to be candid here, even though you represent the industry.
No, Supriya, I think it is a valid concern for the following reason. We know from empirical evidence that when we go out to rural areas, there are more incoming calls than there are outgoing calls, for the simple reason that for affordability reasons, because of the purchasing power differences, people wait for the incoming call to happen. And so there's very little outgoing calls. Now consider the situation when, because of this reduction of the IUC, all I get is 6 paisa for an incoming call to a rural customer. Where then is the commercial rationale for putting up a cell tower and sort of related infrastructure to serve that community? So I think the numbers are very clear in terms of saying this is the reason why we've always said we need to have that appropriate IUC to allow the infrastructure to roll out to the rural areas. So I think that is a very valid consideration and point as a result of this highlighting of the rural penetration matter. And it definitely will, in my opinion, impact the digital rollout schemes of the Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Upadhyay, I want to come in on that because that's a very valid concern that the industry is sharing. It's not just Rajan Matthews who says here on the show, after the IUC charges have been reduced by almost 58%, that's a concern that Vittorio Kalau had flagged off with the Indian authorities as well, that there may be a large-scale shutdown of cellular sites all across rural India, which will obviously have an impact on the government's own Digital India plan and the print there. Mr. Upadhyay.
No. Nothing of that sort is going to really happen. This kind of, I'll not exactly say threat, but this kind of statement is not new. In other countries also similar statements have been made in past whenever regulator tried to reduce the IUC. But nothing of this sort happened there, nor is it going to happen in our country. No rural sites are going to be shut down. Rural India consumes telecom, quite a bit, and they are consuming increasingly more and more. Coming back to, there are two schemes of Government of India. They have almost finalized a rollout tender for about 2,800 sites in the northeast, a part of northeast, and another tender for another part of northeast is almost getting finalized. So, saying that simply reduction of IUC will trigger closing down large scale sites in rural India is not correct, and we will see that it's not going to happen. Coming back to the point which I was trying to make before, and which has a bearing. I mean, if we cannot simply wish away that IUC cannot be made a source of profit. IUC was for cost recovery, and I think the cost of 2G networks have been recovered many times over. The analysts have calculated that the cost recovery on 2G networks for almost all the existing operators is already done. The issue is that again and again we are coming back to the same point, that this IUC issue has gained so much of importance, or it is feeling to be so important only because of the peculiar situation in which our country's telecom sector is finding itself, and the reasons for that are to be seriously searched elsewhere. Okay. They lie elsewhere. They don't lie in reduction or otherwise of IUC. Reduction of IUC was on the card, right? And it's so therefore, first of all, it is not an expected step that has happened. Regulator has not done something out of blue. The regulator itself.
Mr. Upadhyay, I am going to interrupt you there. You've made your point. Let me get in a word from Sanjay Kapoor as well. Let me get a reaction to what you've said. One of the points that you made is that you believe this is just, operators are just threatening to scale down investments. Operators are just threatening to shut sites. Sanjay Kapoor, you've been there, done that. Do you believe that the operators will be forced to scale back investments? Because let's now talk of implications. You're just 10 minutes left on the debate. I want to talk about the implications of this move because the TRAI is the final authority on this particular matter. It's there, and of course operators will challenge it legally. What do you think will be the impact of this move? Will operators scale back investments like Vittorio Kalau said? Will they look at shutting down some rural sites? Could this have a bearing on rural penetration? What is your own view, Sanjay Kapoor?
So I think I'm a little amused by the thought that the rural strategy of operators will depend on what will be the size of the IUC. That amuses me a little bit. I think there are bigger things that play a role when any company decides to go rural or go urban or go to any other part of the world. If you look at the revenue streams of global telcos, there are four basic pillars which are there. There's SMS, there's voice, there's data access, and there's digital services. World over, SMS is extinct and dead, replaced by WhatsApp and chat services. When it comes to voice, every part of the world is seeing a decline on voice. And that's a challenge because voice is getting converted to packets, which is equivalent to data access. Data access per se is a challenge after a threshold percentage penetration happens in any economy, and therefore is not rising. And more operators are giving more and more data for the same amount of money. Therefore, that's not a growth engine anymore after a threshold. India has not reached there as yet. Therefore, it is still bound to grow. But the real meat and the real returns lie in creating digital services. Will India overall, given the pricing regime, given the cost structures, have enough money to reinvest in creating digital services, in creating world-class data access? Answers no. It's not a question of urban or rural. Even in urban India, What's the grade of service that we are getting? What's the grade of consumer experience that we are getting? You don't get data signals indoors. You don't get voice signals indoors. Voice is all garbled, because I agree with Mr. Khullar that the infrastructure for a complete IP and an infrastructure for a high-grade international quality video experience data networks is just not there. And it's not going to happen in the next 2 years or 3 years. It requires a humongous amount of intervention and investments. And I don't think it is contingent to the amount of IUC available or not available to take these decisions. I think it's a much bigger problem than that.
Okay, you know, I'm going to take this across to Dr. Khullar and just turn focus away from the nitty-gritties of telecom and talk about the big picture. And Dr. Khullar, I think 3 months back is when we were speaking to Finance Minister Jaitley, and he said that the minister or the regulator cannot preside over the death of telecom sector. There was then an interministerial group that was set up that was supposed to do the Rescue Act for telecom. At the same time, there is a simultaneous reduction that happens from the regulator. A, there is a big disconnect between the regulatory authority, at least perceptually speaking. But B, isn't it ironical also that at one point when the government is trying to rescue telecom, you've got such a big blow coming in from the regulator? So how does the big picture add up?
I think I said that earlier in the picture. Perhaps I did not articulate it as well as you have. The problem for the telecom sector is that the industry is broke, and it's broke because tariffs are very low and the basic input spectrum is very high, price is high. Now, you have to look at the telecom sector from a longer term perspective, and if government is not able to invest, which it isn't, then who's going to make the investment? The private sector. But if they do have no internal resources, where are the resources going to come from? And that's why I think Mr. Jaitley said what he did, that you cannot be presiding over the death of the sector. It's like killing the golden goose. So the signal to the Department of Telecom was, look, can you work out some solution? The only solution they came up with was, we will stagger your spectrum payments. What does that do? That solves liquidity. It does not change the net burden. So the problem is that a holistic view has to be taken of license fees, SUC, and taxation within the sector, because until those resources are freed up for the sector, those investments are not going to get made. And to talk of IP networks coming about in the space of next 2 or 3 years, that's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. And that is why I am seriously worried that what is going to happen now is the second part of what Mr. Jaitley said. The regulator cannot preside over the death. Of course, he cannot. It's the regulator's responsibility to ensure the orderly development of the sector. Why the IUC has become important is not because of the huge amount of resources that it's going to shift from one place to the other. It's important because it is signaling something very dangerous. It is saying that the regulator is open to charges of partisanship. That is the real danger. That is what the IUC decisions are all about. And that's why there is so much steam and froth, so to speak. And I think that everybody in the panel needs to stand back and look at that big picture. Now, government will someday have to wake up, because look, one company is already in serious trouble. RCom is not being able to service its debt. And if the proposal to sell its stars doesn't go through, where does it leave RCom in terms of being able to retire its debt? Mm-hmm. So, you know, you've already started seeing signals of stress within the telecom sector. How can a regulator issue an explanatory memorandum which does not even mention one word of this when Mr. Jaitley himself says so?
That's a very valid point you've made. Sanjeev Aga, comment on that, because what Mr. Khullar is saying is that the government cannot remain a mute spectator anymore. While tariffs is the jurisdiction of the regulator, but given the state of the industry, the government now cannot wash its hands off this mess and say, we have nothing to do with it.
I will not mince words here. Financial relief would be welcome, reduction in taxes and spectrum charges and revenue share would be welcome. But the elephant in the room, and the big elephant in the room, and the only elephant in the room, is that a lot of neutral people believe that regulation is either you call it partisan, I consider it insidious, and it is therefore a lack of faith in an institution. Now, you asked a question earlier that will towers shut or they will not shut. That is not the right question. If you've got companies with 1 lakh crores, 1.5 lakh crores, 20 years investment, then the considerations are very different. But if you were to ask me, if I was a younger man and someone was to ask me 20 years ago that should an investment be made in this sector after what I know today, I would say that this has been a soul deadening experience. So this has implications beyond telecom. Tomorrow there will be other sectors and you require faith in regulation, in impartial regulation, and if you are not going to develop that, don't think it is going to be restricted to just 2 or 3 telcos or 2 or 3 NPAs.
Mr. Sinha, we'll let you have the final word on this. Completely out of time on this edition of the show, but the fact that people are talking about partial regulation, the fact that people are talking about insidious regulation, regulation not being fair, this doesn't really bode well for the sector. The regulatory authority is now no longer being looked as a fair and impartial authority.
First of all, I don't agree with this view. Because I am telling you, in 2003, I used to tell that regulator was trying to favor some of the operators at the cost of the incumbents. And same thing today I am telling, whenever regulator gets bricks and bats from all the corners, that means they are quite fair. So the original incumbents have also accused them that they are not fair, they are partial with the new operators, and same thing is happening today also. So I feel it is all the same. If your interest is not getting served, or if you are not getting that IUC is getting reduced and it is going to hurt you, it does not mean that operator is partial or is not doing favor to somebody else. If it was true, then it was true even in the past also. And again I am telling you, because of the pain of the high revenue sharing, the cost of the spectrum and other things, you cannot put the blame on IUC. IUC, again I am telling you, we are the worst sufferer. MTNL and BSNL have suffered maximum because of the IUC reduction. And at that point of time, whenever, in fact, we have gone to the court of law also. Today people are talking they will go to court of law. What happened when we went to the court of law? We lost the case. Because it was, if it is in the interest of the consumer, court will also not favor you. And naturally the prices have come down. And this is not fair to blame the operator for. I have got all highest respect for all the operators, whether it was Mr. Pradeep Bajal, Mr. Nripen Misraji, or Mr. Jayesh Sharma, or Mr. Khuldar. They were all fair, and every time they have taken the decisions which is in the interest of the telecom sector. Okay. So therefore, let us not blame the operator.
Okay, completely out of time. This really has been a very, very thought-provoking discussion. Dr. Rahul Khuldar, Sanjeev Vaga, Sanjay Kapoor, Rajan Matthews, Mr. R.K. Upadhyay and Mr. R.S.P. Sinha, thank you for sparing time and talking about saving Indian Telecom. We at ET now believe IUC is not important in isolation, but it is a sign of yet another fault line for the sector, and the fact that the regulator is today open to charges of biased regulation is not just unfortunate, but bodes very bad for Indian policy making.
The telecom sector has been a cash cow for the government, contributing 70,000 crores to the exchequer, employs millions all across India at a time when communication and connectivity is taken an all new meaning. Can the government be a mute spectator anymore? That's the big question. Thanks for watching the India Development Debate on ET Now. Thanks for supporting us in our unbiased coverage of this controversial piece of legislation. Keep it with ET Now. Up next is Top 10 at 10.